You stand just inside the palace threshold, where the stone still holds the day's warmth and releases it slowly into the night. Under your feet, the floor feels firm and slightly polished in places, as if countless careful steps have smoothed it over time. In your hands, a small clay lamp catches, and the olive oil flame steadies into a soft amber glow that seems to breathe with you, brightening and settling with each gentle movement. Beyond these walls, the sea keeps its slow, even surf, a sound that never hurries and never stops, folding the hours into a simple rhythm. The threshold feels like a boundary that is more than architectural. The air changes by a subtle degree, less wind, more stillness, yet the sea's breath still threads through everything, a distant rhythm arriving in soft waves. The stone beneath you is neither cold nor hot, it carries a lingering warmth that rises gently through your sandals, as if the floor is remembering sunlight without needing to show it. Even before you move, you can feel how the palace absorbs and releases heat, scent, sound, slowly, patiently, without urgency. The lamp's clay is slightly rough under your fingers, with tiny grains caught in the fired surface. Its weight is modest but real, grounding your hand and wrist, and the oil inside has a quiet presence, dense, steady, a reservoir of time. The flame is small, but it makes the first nearby details visible, a faint unevenness in the plaster where a hand once smoothed it, a slight sheen where countless bodies passed close by, the edges of a doorway that looks softened, not by decay, but by use. You raise the lamp a little, so the light can find the next step. The flame paints a moving oval on plaster and stone, and every breath you take makes the brightness tremble. Your sandals touch down gently, leather and skin in quiet grit, and the palace answers with a faint echo that disappears into its many corridors. The light moves ahead of you like a calm companion, never rushing, never pulling away. It reveals, then releases. It touches a section of wall, turns it warm, then lets it sink back into shadow as you step forward. The oval of brightness wavers with the smallest shifts of your hand, an almost hypnotic motion, and the palace seems to accept it the way water accepts moonlight, receiving it, breaking it into soft fragments, then letting it go. Your steps find the smoother places without you needing to look down. There is a particular sound to sandals on stone, soft, controlled, a small scrape followed by a hush, and the palace shapes that sound into a brief echo that does not travel far. It rises, meets the angles of the corridor, and fades as if it never meant to be heard. In that fading, you sense how many layers the palace has, not just rooms, but folds of space that hold quiet the way cloth holds warmth. A few paces in, you pause, not because anything demands it, but because the air here has a particular feel. It carries a trace of warm oil and mineral dust, and something salter that the wind has brought inland. The lamp's scent is simple and familiar, and the sea's rhythm underneath it all makes the night feel arranged, as if the hours already know where to go. Stillness is easier here than it is outside. The pause does not feel like stopping, it feels like settling. The air rests against your face and hands with a softness that suggests thick walls and protected spaces. The mineral dust has an almost dry sweetness, a chalky note that makes you think of stone cut and smoothed, of plaster mixed and spread. Over it, the olive oil carries a faint fruitiness, warmed by flame, slightly sharper near the wick where it burns. And beneath everything, the sea continues, steady, repeating, so distant that it should be only an idea, and yet so consistent it becomes more reliable than thought. It arrives as a low, even hush, sometimes a fraction louder when the wind aligns just right, sometimes softer, but never absent. In that steadiness, your own breathing begins to feel less like an action and more like a natural part of the night's rhythm. You move forward again, following a passage that bends in a way that feels natural, as if the palace grew around old habits of walking. The floor is smoother where many feet have worn it, your step finds those polished places without effort. Light gathers at the edges of your lamp's reach, then fades, leaving the rest of the corridor in a calm, textured dark. The bend in the corridor makes the space feel alive, not in any dramatic way, but in the way a familiar house seems to guide you without instructions. The palace does not reveal itself all at once. It offers itself in gentle portions, one corner, one threshold, one short stretch of wall, and then another. The turning passage creates a small anticipation that never becomes tension, only softness. You will see what comes next when you arrive, and until then, you are simply walking. The floor's worn places are like quiet pathways embedded in stone. You can almost feel them through the soles, a slightly smoother glide beneath your weight, a subtle difference that suggests the accumulated movement of many lives. The lamplight picks up tiny changes in texture, grain in the plaster, shallow marks, faint scratches, details that daylight might flatten into sameness. At night, everything has depth, because light is scarce and therefore meaningful. At a corner, a red column rises from a pale base, its color deepened by night. The paint looks almost brown in the low light, like dried earth after rain, and the column widens slightly as it climbs, an odd, unmistakable shape that makes your hand notice the taper when you brush your fingers along it. The wood above, where beam meets stone, gives a soft, dry scent that sits behind the lamp oil. The column's presence is steady and quiet, like a tree trunk inside a sheltered grove. Its surface holds the lamp's glow in a muted way, absorbing the warmth rather than reflecting it. Where the paint has worn thin, the texture changes, slightly rougher, slightly more matte, so your fingertips register small variations without needing to press. The taper, wider above, narrower below, creates a gentle optical surprise, especially in low light. Your eyes expect one shape and receive another, and the result is strangely calming. The mind stops insisting on certainty and simply observes. The pale base beneath the column catches more light, and the contrast makes the red seem deeper, richer, as if the color has thickened during the day and now rests in darkness like a settled pigment. Above, the wood meets stone with a careful seam. The scent there is dry, faintly resinous, with a bitterness that suggests cedar or cypress used long ago and still holding its character. It is not a strong smell, it is a quiet undertone, a reminder that the palace is not only stone but also timber, joined together with deliberate skill. You don't rush. You let the palace set your pace, one step, then the next, and the next. Somewhere far inside, a door settles on its hinge with a small wooden cough, and then the quiet returns, as if it had only lifted its head to listen. The sound of the door is brief and unthreatening, like a creature shifting in sleep. It does not call you to investigate. It simply exists, then passes. The palace seems full of such tiny noises, wood easing into place, stone holding weight, air moving through a narrow opening, and each one rises and falls without consequence. Your pace becomes a kind of slow agreement with the building. The lamp's flame stays steady when you move gently, and when it does flicker, it flickers softly, never frantic. You notice how your shoulder relaxes when you allow time to stretch. Even your hands hold the lamp with less effort, as if the clay has become an extension of your palm. After a while, the passage opens into a wider space, and you feel it before you see it. The air is cooler, moving more freely, and the lamp flame leans a little as a draft finds it. You step out into the edge of the central court, where the ceiling disappears and the night sky begins. The transition is immediate in the body. Skin notices cooler air, hair shifts slightly as a breeze passes, breath feels a little more open. The lamp responds too. The flame tilts, then steadies, then tilts again, as if it is listening to the wind and answering in light. The court's openness is not empty. It is spacious. It holds the quiet differently than corridors do. In narrow halls, sound is contained and directed. Here, it disperses. Your footsteps feel smaller, less echoed, as if the open air absorbs them. The sky above is a dark vault, and the court becomes a bowl that holds it gently, stone cradling night. Above you, the stars are sharp and numerous, unbroken by any modern glow. Starlight is thin, but it is honest, and it lays a pale wash across the stones so you can see the court's broad shape. Your lamp makes a warm island at your feet, and the contrast, amber near, silver far, gives the whole place a quiet, cinematic depth. The stars look steady, as if they have always been arranged this way and always will be. Their light is delicate, almost fragile, yet it travels so far that it feels enduring. The starlight paints the edges of columns and walls with a faint silver outline, a soft emphasis that makes architecture visible without making it loud. Your lamp's warmth gathers around you like a small shelter within a larger shelter. It creates a circle of intimacy on the stone, your hands, your feet, the hem of your clothing, the nearest section of wall. Beyond that, the court exists in a gentle gradient from warm to cool, from close to far. The contrast is soothing. Your world is both contained and expansive at once. You stand at the court's edge and listen. The surf is still there, distant but steady, and the wind slides along the upper walls and down into the open space. The palace breathes in small ways too, a soft drip somewhere below, a faint settling creak of wood, the whisper of your own clothing when you shift your weight. Listening here feels like widening rather than focusing. You do not strain. You simply let sound arrive. The surf provides the deepest layer, like a steady drum played far away. Above it, the wind makes a softer texture, a continuous hush that varies slightly as it meets edges and corners. Sometimes it slips down a passage and returns as a faint draft against your cheek, carrying a trace of sea salt. The drip, somewhere below, somewhere hidden, adds a tiny punctuation. It is not frequent enough to become a rhythm, but it is consistent enough to suggest water moving through channels the palace keeps out of sight. The creak of wood is even subtler, a reminder that beams hold weight and adjust with temperature, that the palace is always settling into itself. Even your clothing becomes audible in the absence of other noise. A small shift of fabric, a gentle brush at your shoulder or knee, and you can hear it. Not loudly. Just clearly. It makes your body feel present without demanding attention. You walk along the court slowly, not crossing straight through, but keeping close to the colonnade where the shadows gather. In the lamplight, the nearest plaster shows a faint sheen, like a skin smoothed by careful hands. In the starlight beyond, the center of the court looks almost empty, as if the sky has poured down and filled it. The colonnade's shade is gentle, not heavy. It offers a quieter kind of darkness, the kind that feels protective. Columns rise beside you in repeating intervals, and that repetition calms the mind the way regular waves do, predictable, steady, without surprise. The plaster close to the lamp reveals its own quiet craftsmanship. You can see where it was applied in smooth arcs, where it was corrected, where it was made even. The sheen is not glossy, it is a soft glow that comes from many touches, many nights, many days of hands passing along the same path. The lamp makes these surfaces appear almost alive, not because they move, but because light moves across them. In the center of the court, the starlight is so faint that stone seems to dissolve into a pale, smoky shape. The emptiness there is calming. It does not feel abandoned, it feels reserved, as if the court is holding space for the sky itself. At a point where the wall angles, you notice shallow marks along the base, old scuffs, the memory of processions, of people passing with baskets, with jars, with small offerings carried carefully. Tonight, there is no crowd, no ceremony you must join, only the gentle sense that the court has held many nights like this. And will hold many more. The scuffs are subtle, easy to miss in daylight, but in lamplight they become a story written in texture. They are not dramatic scratches, they are shallow dullness where stone has been touched again and again. The wall's angle catches your lamp's glow at just the right moment, and the marks appear like a faint shadow of movement. You imagine processions without needing to watch them. The idea is enough, the sound of sandals, the soft shift of baskets, the careful pace of people carrying what matters. The palace has held all of that. It has held laughter and fatigue, work and ritual, footsteps that were hurried and footsteps that were slow. Tonight, it holds only you, and it does so with the same neutrality, the same steady acceptance. Later, you follow a corridor that leads away from the open air, back into the palace's layered interior. The temperature changes by degrees, warmer again, and the smell of stone becomes more present. Your lamp makes the space feel intimate, as if the darkness beyond its glow is something you can leave untouched. The corridor receives you the way a room receives a whispered voice, enclosing, softening, making everything smaller and closer. The air warms slightly, and the wind becomes less direct, transformed into faint drafts that slip along hidden paths. The smell of stone grows clearer, cool mineral notes, a hint of dampness in deeper recesses, and the faint dust that settles in quiet places. The intimacy of lamplight is not only visual, it is emotional. It suggests that you are not required to notice everything. You are allowed to see only what the light offers. The rest can remain in shadow without being a problem. Darkness becomes a resting place rather than an absence. A wall to your right carries paint, fresco color softened by centuries and by shadow. You don't linger on faces, and the night doesn't ask you to. Instead, you notice the curve of a leaf, the sweep of a flower, and a ribbon of blue that suggests water or sky, all of it set into plaster with a confidence that makes the palace feel alive even when it's quiet. The paint sits in the plaster like a memory held close. In daylight, it might feel more historical, more fixed. In lamplight, it becomes intimate, almost private. The leaf's curve looks gentle rather than decorative. The flower's form suggests care, attention, hands trained to translate living shapes into pigment and line. The ribbon of blue is especially calm. It makes you think of water without demanding that you picture waves. It is simply a cool color in a warm world, a quiet contrast that relaxes the eyes. The lamp makes the blue deepen and shift, sometimes it looks almost greenish, sometimes more like night sky, depending on the angle of the flame. Your fingers hover near the painted surface, and you decide not to touch it. The lamp flame flickers once, and the colors seem to move, not because they change, but because light is always changing. That small movement is enough. There is a tenderness in the decision not to touch. The fresco does not need contact to be felt. The air between your fingers and the plaster is enough of a connection. The lamp's flicker provides a tiny illusion of life, edges softening, shadows shifting, pigments warming and cooling, and your mind accepts it the way it accepts the shimmer of stars. You feel the urge to hold the moment, then you let it pass. Nothing here requires grasping. The palace offers, and you receive, and then you continue. You turn into a stairwell where the air opens upward. A light well above, dark now, still makes the space feel less enclosed, as if the palace has built-in breathing places. You climb slowly, the stone steps worn into slight hollows that guide your feet. The stairwell's vertical space changes the feeling in your chest. Breath comes a little easier, as if your lungs recognize the openness even in darkness. The light well is a pocket of night above, a rectangle of deeper shadow that suggests sky without revealing it. It feels like a deliberate design, a place where daylight would pour in, and where at night, darkness can gather without becoming heavy. The steps are shaped by many feet. The hollows are gentle, not deep, but your soles find them naturally. Each step feels like it expects you. The stone's surface is smoother at the center, rougher at the edges where fewer people place their weight. Lamplight emphasizes those differences, making the stair a quiet map of movement. Halfway up, you pause on a landing and lift the lamp, watching the light climb the wall. The plaster shows faint trowel marks, and the corners where stone meets wood look carefully fitted. The palace is not symmetrical, not neat in a strict way, and yet everything feels placed with intention, as if practical needs and sacred habits learn to share the same rooms. The landing offers a small stillness within the act of climbing. Your calves soften, your shoulders lower, and the lamp's flame steadies again as your movement stops. When you lift the light, the wall becomes a surface full of quiet evidence, faint arcs where plaster was smoothed, small irregularities where the hand adjusted pressure, a tiny ridge where one application met another. Where stone meets wood, the join is careful but not obsessively perfect. There is a human quality to it. The palace feels like something made by hands that understood both function and beauty, hands that were allowed to leave subtle traces of themselves. In the low light, those traces are comforting rather than flawed. At the top of the stair, a narrow passage leads you toward the quieter heart of the west wing. The air here smells faintly of clay and stored grain, a dryness that sits behind the lamp oil. The sound changes too, your footsteps become sharper, more contained, as if the walls are closer. The passage narrows and the palace becomes more private again. The air shifts from open to contained, the smell of clay feels dry, powdery, and the stored grain adds a faint warmth, like the memory of sun on husks. It is not a strong scent, but it is unmistakable once you notice it. The acoustics change with the width of the corridor. Your steps produce a slightly clearer echo, a sharper edge that returns quickly. Even the lamp's tiny sounds, oil moving, wick faintly crackling, feel more present. The walls seem closer not only to your body but to your attention. You reach a long, shadowed corridor where massive jars stand in rows, their bellies rising from the floor like patient animals asleep. The pithoi are taller than you expect, and their rims catch the lamplight in a thin, bright line. Between them, the darkness is deeper, and the air is cooler, holding that mineral scent of stone and the faintest trace of old oil. The corridor feels like a storage of quiet itself. The jars, pithoi, stand with a kind of dignified stillness. Their clay surfaces are matte in the low light, absorbing warmth, holding shadow. The rims catch the lamp and become narrow crescents of brightness, delicate against the mass of the vessels. The spaces between the jars are darker than the corridor behind you. They form pockets of cool air where the light cannot quite reach. When you breathe, the air feels slightly cooler at the back of your throat, as if the corridor has its own temperature separate from the rest of the palace. The mineral scent is stronger here, grounded and ancient, and the trace of old oil suggests what the jars have held, wealth stored quietly, measured carefully, kept safe. You walk between the jars slowly, careful not to brush them. In the quiet, the smallest sounds become detailed, the soft rasp of your sandal, the tiny click of a lamp handle shifting in your grip, the whisper of fabric at your knees. The corridor seems to lengthen, not by distance, but by how gently time stretches inside it. You become more precise in your movements without trying. The jars invite carefulness. Your shoulders narrow slightly, your elbow tucks in, the lamp stays close so it won't swing. Each step is placed rather than taken, and that placement makes time feel thicker, slower, more spacious. The sounds are intimate. The rasp of sandal on stone has texture now, grit, smoothness, then silence. The lamp handle clicks once, a small metallic or clay sound depending on its shape, then settles. Fabric whispers at your knees with each step. A soft brush that is almost like wind in dry grass. Nothing is loud, but everything is clear. Here and there, you see lids, flat stones, clay covers, set aside, and small signs that someone has been here earlier, checking stores, counting, recording. In a niche near the end of the corridor, a low shelf holds a few small clay tablets, no bigger than your hand, their surfaces pressed with neat marks. You don't need to read them to understand their purpose, they carry the quiet weight of inventory, of careful keeping. The lids resting aside suggest routine rather than disturbance. They have their own settled positions, as if they were moved and then placed back with care. The shelf of tablets feels like a pause within the corridor, a place where the palace's administrative mind touches the physical world. The tablets are humble objects, clay, small, compact, yet they hold a kind of authority. The marks pressed into them are precise, deliberate, and the dryness of the clay makes the impressions crisp. Even without understanding the script, you can feel the intention: names, numbers, categories, a calm system that keeps the palace's abundance organized. The signs are pressed in lines, a script meant for quick, practiced hands, and the clay has dried to a soft, pale brown. You imagine a scribe earlier in the day, stylus in hand, making these marks while light still reached the doorway. At night, the tablets rest, and the numbers, whatever they are, rest with them. The image of the scribe arrives gently, not as a new scene, but as a quiet layer over what you see. You can almost feel the stylus's pressure in the clay, firm enough to leave a mark, careful enough not to crack the surface. The lines of writing suggest fluency, the kind that comes from repetition and training. The clay's color is warm and muted, like dried earth. In lamplight it looks softer, and you can see faint fingerprints along an edge, a tiny ridge where the tablet was held. Those small human traces make the record feel less abstract. This is accounting, yes, but it is also touch, time, attention. You step back from the niche and let the corridor take you onward. The jars stand on both sides, and their shadows stretch and shrink as your lamp moves. A tiny drop of oil shifts inside the lamp's bowl, and the flame responds, brightening for a moment, then calming again. The corridor takes you the way a slow current takes a leaf, without push, without demand. Your lamp's movement changes the world. Shadows lengthen, then shorten, jar bellies become hills, then return to rounded clay. The brightness slides along rims and handles and then disappears. Inside the lamp, the oil's shift is a small event in a quiet world. The flame reacts instantly, lifting, brightening, then settling back into its steady calm. That brief change makes you aware of the lamp as a living object: fuel, wick, air, flame, all balanced in a small, steady system. After a while, you turn out of the storage corridor, and the air changes as if you have crossed an invisible line. The scent of grain fades, and a more domestic warmth returns: wood, cloth, a faint trace of perfume caught in plaster. The passage widens slightly, and the palace feels less like a vault and more like a home. The shift is gentle but noticeable. The cool, mineral weight of the magazine softens, and the air becomes more mixed, less purely stone and clay, more layered with lived-in scents. The faint perfume is subtle, like herbs or flowers rubbed into oil long ago, absorbed into walls and textiles. It is not strong enough to announce itself, but it adds softness to the space. The corridor's widened shape changes your posture. Your shoulders loosen. Your steps sound less sharp. The palace feels more like a place where people rest and move easily, rather than a place where wealth is guarded in darkness. The lamplight seems warmer here, not because it changes, but because surfaces reflect it differently, plaster and wood catching it with a gentler glow. You come to a small space where a basin sits lower than the floor around it, reached by a few shallow steps. The stone here is smoother, worn by water and by bare feet. The lamplight doubles itself on the damp surface, and the reflected glow trembles like a second flame. The basin's lowered form feels like a quiet invitation downward, a small descent that suggests transition. The steps are shallow and friendly, shaped by repetition. Their edges are softened, you can see how water and feet have polished them over time. The stone's smoothness has a particular feel even before you touch it: cool, reliable, slightly luminous in lamplight. The doubled light is mesmerizing. The dampness catches the flame and returns it as a trembling reflection, so the basin seems to hold a second lamp, a small waterborne counterpart that moves more than the original. The glow on the stone is not bright, but it has depth, like a quiet pool of warmth. You descend one step, then another, and the air cools at the bottom, as if the stone is storing night itself. You don't need to perform a ritual, and you don't name anything aloud. You simply place your hand on the smooth edge and feel how the stone holds a memory of water, a memory of careful washing before entering a more sacred room. The descent changes the sound of your breath. The basin's sunken space holds air differently, it feels cooler against your skin, and the smell of damp stone becomes clearer. The stone edge under your hand is smooth and cool, and it carries a faint moisture that makes your fingertips feel slightly chilled. The sensation is grounding. The stone does not yield, but it supports. The basin's presence suggests that people have stood here many times, letting water mark a boundary between outside and inside, between ordinary and sacred, between day and night. Tonight, you do not need to do anything formal. Simply touching the edge is enough to feel the weight of tradition without being burdened by it. When you climb back up, the lamp seems brighter, as if the darkness below made you more aware of it. You follow the corridor that leads toward a smaller chamber where the space feels deliberate, benches along the wall, a pale stone seat set into place, and painted forms on plaster that catch the lamp glow and become watchful shapes without becoming threatening. The room is intimate, built for quiet attention rather than grandeur. Ascending from the basin, you feel warmth return in small degrees, less cool air, more gentle lamplight on your hands. The lamp's flame looks steadier, brighter, as if you have recalibrated to its glow. The corridor leads you toward a chamber that feels composed, arranged. The benches along the wall are smooth where bodies have sat. The pale stone seat holds light in a soft way, almost luminous, not reflective but quietly glowing. Painted forms on plaster watch in a symbolic manner, shapes and motifs that suggest meaning without forcing it. In the flicker of lamplight, they seem to shift slightly, not into menace, but into presence, like a calm guardian that does not move. You don't stay long. The chamber doesn't ask you to. It is enough to stand in the doorway, to notice how the gypsum lightens under flame, and how the air feels cooler here, as if the room prefers stillness. Outside, the palace continues its patient life of corridors and courts, and the sea continues its rhythm, indifferent to rooms and thrones alike. The doorway becomes a threshold of its own. You stand and let the room be what it is, contained, quiet, deliberate. The gypsum's pale tone seems to drink in the lamplight and return it softly, making the space feel almost weightless. The air is cooler, as if the stone is intentionally holding on to night. You sense that staying longer would not add anything. The room's calm is complete without your presence. And so you allow yourself to move on, gently, without forcing meaning. The sea continues beyond walls and corridors, steady and unjudging, its rhythm indifferent in the most comforting way. You turn away and walk back through the connecting halls. The palace's architecture leads you gently, guiding your steps through a sequence of spaces, tight, then open, dim, then faintly lit, warm stone, then cooler air near a light well. You begin to feel how the palace is not a single place, but a layered night landscape made of plaster and shadow. Moving through these halls feels like moving through slow thoughts that never become tangled. Each space has its own temperature, its own scent, its own acoustics. A tight corridor holds your footsteps close. A slightly wider passage lets them fade. A light well offers a cooler draft, and then another room returns you to gentle warmth. The palace becomes less like a building and more like a series of textures. Plaster that holds faint paint. Stone that holds warmth. Wood that holds dry scent. Shadows that hold rest. Even the way your lamp's light behaves changes from place to place. Sometimes it glides along smooth surfaces, sometimes it breaks on rougher stone, sometimes it disappears into a recess and makes darkness feel deep and calm. In a passage near a workshop area, you catch a different scent, clay dust, a hint of charcoal, the ghost of heat where kilns once worked. The tools are quiet now, set down until morning. A small pile of broken pottery sherds lies near a wall, and the edges catch your lamplight, revealing painted curves and spirals, simple patterns made by steady hands. The workshop scent is honest. Clay dust is dry and fine, almost like flour in the air, settling softly in corners. Charcoal leaves a faint bitterness, the memory of heat and fire without any active flame. The ghost of warmth lingers in the stones here as it lingers elsewhere, but it feels different, more practical, more associated with labor. The sherds by the wall are quiet evidence of work, pieces that did not survive firing, fragments of vessels that were once whole. The lamplight catches their edges and reveals their painted lines, curves that suggest a pot's roundness, spirals that might have echoed waves, simple motifs repeated with confidence. There is no sadness in the brokenness, it feels like part of the process, part of the daily cycle of making. You imagine the day that has ended, hands shaping clay, turning vessels on a wheel, smoothing surfaces, painting in mineral colors. In the evening, those hands would wash, wipe, and settle into quieter tasks. Now the night holds the empty workshop the way it holds the court, without judgment, without urgency. The imagined day is gentle, not a scene you step into, but a soft overlay on the space. You can sense the rhythm of craft, the steady turning of a wheel, the wet sheen of clay, the careful smoothing with a palm or tool. You can almost smell water used to keep clay workable, and feel the warmth of a kiln that has cooled. Then the evening comes, tools placed down, dust settling, footsteps leaving. The night arrives as it always does, slowly, evenly, and the workshop becomes a resting place for materials. The palace does not insist on productivity. It allows stillness, and the stillness feels earned without needing to be proved. Later still, you find yourself near an upper gallery where the air is moving, and you can hear the wind more clearly. It passes around the columns and along the edges of open spaces, making a soft, continuous hush. When you stop walking, your own stillness becomes a soundless thing, and you can hear the lamp's tiny life, the wick's faint crackle, the minute shift of oil feeding flame. The gallery feels lighter, not necessarily brighter, but more open. The air moves more freely here, and the wind sound becomes a constant, gentle presence. It is never harsh, it is a steady hush that brushes along stone and wood, turning architecture into an instrument that plays only soft notes. When you stop, you notice the contrast between motion and stillness. Walking creates small sounds, but stillness reveals the finer ones, the wick's quiet crackle, the subtle whisper of oil feeding flame, the nearly inaudible movement of warm air rising from the lamp. These tiny sounds are soothing, like a lullaby made of physics, fuel, heat, air, all cooperating calmly. You walk along the gallery and glance down into a light well. In daylight it would be bright, but now it is a deep pocket of darkness, a place where night collects. The lamplight doesn't reach the bottom, it only touches the upper edges and makes a pale border. You feel a small respect for the palace's dark places, not fear, just recognition that darkness is part of the building's design. The light well is like a vertical corridor of night. Darkness gathers there with density, not menacing, simply deep. Your lamp cannot fill it, it can only outline it. The upper edges catch light and become a soft frame, a pale border that emphasizes how far down the darkness goes. Respect arises naturally. Not fear, nothing here threatens, but a recognition that some spaces are meant to remain quiet, unseen. Darkness is not an error in design. It is a feature, a resting place for the eyes and mind. The palace holds such places the way the sea holds depths, calmly, without explanation. At the end of the gallery, you turn into a suite of rooms that feel softer. The floor here is smoother, and the plaster carries paint that suggests water, curving forms, marine motion, and blue shapes that the lamp makes shimmer. The art does not insist, it simply offers a gentle reminder that the sea is never far away, even here inland on the hill. The suite feels like a private warmth. The floor's smoothness changes the way your steps sound, less scrape, more hush. The plaster here seems finer, the surfaces more carefully finished. The marine shapes are calm and flowing, and the lamp's flicker makes them seem to breathe in place, as if water is moving gently without making waves. The blue pigment, dimmed by lamplight, still holds its coolness. It shifts and deepens depending on where the flame is. Sometimes it looks like deep water under starlight, sometimes it becomes a softer tone, like twilight reflected on the sea. The art is not demanding. It does not ask you to analyze. It simply surrounds you with an atmosphere of quiet motion. You stand and let the dolphins, if that's what they are, remain at the edge of your vision. You do not focus on faces, and you do not need to. The night is kind to peripheral details, curves of fin, sweep of tail, the suggestion of movement in still plaster. The dolphins live best in the corner of your eye. When you look directly, they become shapes. When you allow them to remain peripheral, they become presence, gentle, gliding, calm. The lamp makes their outlines soften, and that softness is soothing. You do not need detail. Suggestion is enough. The mind can rest when it is not asked to identify everything precisely. You notice the curve of a fin and how it echoes the curve of the corridor you walked earlier. You notice a sweep of tail and how it resembles the arc of lamplight on stone. The palace repeats patterns in different forms, architecture, painting, sound, and those repetitions lull attention into ease. A low table sits against one wall, and on it rests a folded cloth. You brush your fingertips over the fabric, linen, cool and smooth, slightly heavier with night humidity. The cloth smells faintly of clean water and a trace of oil, as if it has been used to wipe hands after a meal or to cover a small object that matters. The table's presence is simple and domestic. It does not command the room, it simply exists as something useful. The folded cloth feels carefully placed, not abandoned. When your fingertips touch it, you feel the coolness of linen, the fine weave that catches slightly against skin. The humidity of night has made it heavier by a small degree, giving it a gentle weight that feels comforting. The scent is faint but clear, clean water, a trace of oil, maybe the tiniest hint of soap like herbs used for washing. It smells like care, like routine. The cloth is not an event, it is an object that quietly suggests human habits, wiping hands, covering things, keeping spaces orderly. You set your lamp down on a stable ledge, just for a moment, and listen again. The ledge holds the lamp securely, and the flame steadies, no longer responding to the subtle sway of your hand. Without your movement, the light becomes calmer, less jittered. Shadows settle into place. The room's forms become more stable, the table, the plaster, the painted curves, all held in a quiet balance. You listen, and the act of listening feels deeper now, as if the softer rooms amplify quiet rather than dampen it. The sea remains beneath everything, steady and low. The palace adds its own layer, wood easing with temperature, stone holding stillness, the faintest suggestion of water somewhere in the building's depths. Your own breath becomes the nearest sound, and even that feels softened, as if the room has wrapped it in linen. When you lift the lamp again, your hand feels warm where the clay has absorbed heat from the flame. The lamp is small, but it changes the whole world around it, turning plaster into color and stone into landscape. You carry it out of the rooms and back into a corridor where the red columns return, tall and calm, their paint absorbing the light and giving it back as a deep, earthy glow. The warmth in the clay is gentle, like a living pulse in your palm. It is not hot enough to demand you shift your grip, only warm enough to remind you that flame is working continuously, steadily, hour after hour. The lamp feels like a small hearth you can carry, contained, controlled, quiet. As you move, the light moves with you, and the palace reconfigures itself in response. A wall that was flat becomes textured. A corner becomes a soft boundary. A threshold becomes a gentle rise of shadow and then light. Stone becomes landscape because light gives it slopes, edges, valleys of darkness, ridges of brightness. The palace is always the same, yet in lamplight it feels renewed with each step. The red columns appear again, and their color looks deeper now, as if the night has thickened it. The paint absorbs the lamp's warmth and returns it as a muted glow, earthy and steady. The column's repeated presence is meditative, one, then another, each one a calm marker of passage. As the night deepens, you find a place to pause that feels neither ceremonial nor private, just practical and quiet, a bench along a wall where the stone is smooth. You sit, letting the firmness support you, and you rest the lamp nearby, where it can cast light without glare. The bench feels cool at first contact, then quickly neutral as your body's warmth meets the stone. The firmness is absolute, unyielding, and that very unyielding quality is what makes it comforting. There is no sinking, no uncertainty. Your body adjusts to the surface and then rests. Placing the lamp nearby is a careful act. You choose a spot where it will not tip, where its light will not be directly in your eyes. The flame becomes a steady companion to stillness. It illuminates your hands. The front of your knees, a small section of wall, enough to reassure without stimulating. In this posture, time expands. You are not waiting for anything. You are simply allowing the night to be night. Sitting still, you begin to notice body sensations that walking kept in the background. Your shoulders feel the gentle weight of the day you've carried, even if you have carried nothing but yourself. Your feet feel the coolness creeping in from stone, and the warmth still held in your skin. The air touches your face with a faint saltiness that the wind has brought, and the lamp's warmth brushes your hands whenever you move. Your shoulders soften with awareness. The weight there is not painful, it is simply the accumulated presence of posture, movement, gravity. When you sit, that weight redistributes, and you can feel small muscles letting go. Your feet notice the stone more now. Coolness rises slowly, not sharply, like water seeping upward. Yet your skin still holds warmth in places that were active: calves, ankles, hands. The contrast is pleasant, as if your body is balancing itself between warmth and coolness. The air's faint saltiness is subtle, a whisper of the sea carried inland. It touches your lips and nostrils with a clean edge. The lamp's warmth brushes your fingers when you shift them near the clay, and you notice how warmth can be localized, a small island of heat in a larger cool room, like the lamp's light is an island in darkness. After a while, you stand again, not because you must, but because the palace invites slow movement the way the sea invites slow listening. You walk back toward the central court, choosing a different corridor this time, letting the palace rearrange itself around you. Standing feels unhurried. Your legs straighten slowly, your balance returns without effort. The act is gentle enough that the lamp flame barely reacts. You begin walking with the same careful pace as before, allowing the palace to reveal itself in measured portions. Choosing a different corridor changes the pattern of your experience without changing its tone. New corners, slightly different drafts, different textures of plaster and stone. Yet the palace feels consistent, as if every route belongs to the same quiet mind. The rearrangement is not a puzzle, it is a soothing variation, like waves arriving in slightly different shapes while keeping the same rhythm. The court appears again like an open bowl of sky. The stars look unchanged, steady in their enormous distance, while your lamp makes a small, tender glow along the edge of stone. You walk near the colonnade, and your footsteps, steady and unhurried, become another soft sound the palace can hold. Stepping into the court feels like stepping into breath. The openness receives you, and the stars above seem as distant as ever, unaffected by your movement. Their steadiness is comforting. They do not respond. They simply continue. The lamp's glow near the colonnade creates a gentle line of warmth along the stone. It touches the bases of columns, the lower plaster, the places where walls meet floor. Your footsteps become quieter here, not because you walk differently, but because the court disperses sound. Your steps are present, but they do not linger. You become aware of the court scale again. It is large enough to feel spacious, small enough to feel held. Sky above, stone below, and you moving between them with a small flame. At a place where the court's stone floor meets a raised threshold, you stop and look upward. The night above does not demand to be understood. It simply continues, with the same patient spread of starlight, the same invisible turning of hours. Nothing needs to be remembered, the court will remain, and the sea will keep its rhythm beyond the walls. Looking upward changes your sense of self. The stars are numerous and quiet, and the mind naturally becomes quieter in response. The sky does not ask questions. It does not offer answers. It simply is, and that simplicity is restful. The raised threshold under your feet feels like a gentle boundary, stone slightly higher, a line that marks transition. You stand with one foot near it, feeling the edge through your sandal. And you sense how the palace is full of such boundaries, each one softening movement into a slow awareness. Nothing needs to be remembered. The thought arrives like a small release. You do not need to carry the court with you. It will remain. The sea beyond will remain. The palace is not fragile, it is patient. You turn away from the open sky and return to the interior. The lamp's light feels warmer now, and the shadows feel less like absence and more like rest. In a small side room, you notice another set of tablets on a shelf, and beside them, a lump of clay not yet used, soft enough, once, to take marks. Returning inside feels like drawing a cloak around your shoulders. The air is less open, more contained. The lamp's warmth becomes more noticeable because walls reflect it. Shadows feel softer, not as voids but as gentle areas where nothing needs to be seen. The side room's shelf holds tablets that resemble the earlier ones, small, orderly, quiet. Their presence suggests continuity. The palace records itself, keeps track, maintains its internal memory through clay. The lump of unused clay is humble, unassuming, yet full of potential. It sits there in stillness, as if waiting for a hand that will not arrive tonight. You picture the scribes who press signs into wet clay, quick and precise, keeping track of jars, oil, grain, textiles, the quiet mathematics of a palace. Some signs belong to an older system, still not speaking its language to you. Later, other marks will appear, shaped from the earlier ones, used for different words, different voices. Tonight, those futures are not here, only the presence of clay, and the stillness of records waiting in the dark. The image comes gently, like a shadow overlay. A scribe's posture, a stylus held with practiced ease, the quick press and lift, the line formed, the tablet set aside to dry. It is work that requires attention but not drama. The palace's mathematics is quiet, like the sea's rhythm, consistent, repetitive, reliable. You sense the layers of time embedded in the act, older signs, newer signs, future changes. But tonight is not the place for long histories. Tonight holds only what is present: clay, tablets, shelves, darkness. The idea of future marks is allowed to pass by without being pursued. You let the thought pass without holding it. The lamp flame leans, then steadies, and your breathing steadies with it. The palace does not ask you to solve its mysteries. It offers corridors, stone, plaster, and the gentle honesty of night air. Letting the thought pass feels like exhaling. The mind's tendency to grasp at meaning relaxes. The lamp's flame becomes a teacher of small adjustments. it leans when air moves, steadies when air calms. You can do the same. You can lean with the night, then settle. The palace's mysteries remain, but they are not urgent. They are not even necessary. Tonight is enough without answers. The simple honesty of night air, cool, slightly salty, slightly mineral, becomes more important than interpretation. Later on, you pass a wall where the paint is mostly geometric, bands and curves that frame a space the way a lullaby frames silence. The colors are mineral, confident, and even in lamplight they hold their character. Minoan art often chooses movement and life over strict realism, and you can feel that here in the way a simple curve suggests a living thing without needing to name it. The geometric paint feels steady, reassuring. Bands of color create borders and rhythms. Curves soften the structure of walls, making stone feel less severe. The pigment holds its tone even under the lamp's warm bias. It remains itself, grounded, mineral, calm. The curves are especially soothing. They suggest movement without depicting it literally. They remind you of waves without showing water, of plants without showing leaves. The mind can rest in suggestion. It does not have to identify. It can simply feel the calm that comes from repeated forms. You continue, letting the palace's patterns repeat in new combinations. A red column, then a shadowed doorway, then a pale stone threshold. A draft from a light well, then warmer air again. The surf remains constant, distant, and it becomes easier to believe that the sea is the true metronome of this place, keeping time for the palace whether anyone listens or not. Repetition becomes a gentle hypnosis. Column, doorway, threshold, each sequence is familiar, yet never identical. Light wells offer cool drafts that touch your face and then disappear. Warmer air returns in enclosed corridors, wrapping you softly. The surf continues as the deepest rhythm. It does not change pace for your steps. It does not swell into drama. It remains steady, and in that steadiness you feel the palace's timekeeping. Not clocks, not bells, just waves arriving and retreating beyond sight. As the night grows older, lamps elsewhere in the palace begin to disappear one by one. You notice it in the way certain corridors lose their faint distant glow, and the dark thickens gently, like a blanket being drawn across a room. Somewhere, a servant or guard will be pinching out flames, or carrying lamps away to be refilled, leaving only a few pools of light where they are needed. The dark thickens without threat. It is gradual, like dusk deepening into night. A corridor that once had a faint warm dot of light at the far end becomes uniformly shadowed. Another glow disappears around a corner. Each extinguished lamp is not an alarm, it is a soft marker of time passing. You imagine the careful gesture of snuffing a flame, pinching it out, lifting the lamp, the brief curl of smoke that follows. The palace becomes quieter not because sound changes, but because light changes. Darkness invites silence in the mind. You keep your own lamp, and you walk more slowly now, as if the darkness itself has softened your pace. The palace feels larger when there is less light. Not because it changes, but because your world becomes the size of what you can see. Your lamp becomes more precious simply because there are fewer others. Its glow feels like a small promise: you will see enough. You do not need to see everything. The palace expands into darkness beyond your circle of light, and that expansion makes space feel larger, deeper, more dreamlike. Your world becomes immediate: lamp, wall, floor, the next step. The rest becomes a gentle unknown that does not demand exploration. The limitation is soothing. It gives your attention a boundary, and within that boundary, calm becomes easier. You return once more to the storerooms, not to count or check, but simply to feel the quiet there. The pit hoists stand in their rows, and the lamp light shows their rounded shoulders and narrow mouths. The air is cool and steady, and the smell of clay is deep and grounding. The magazines receive you again with their dense stillness. The jars look the same, and that sameness is comforting. Their clay bodies hold shadow and absorb light. The rims catch thin crescents of brightness. The corridor's darkness between them feels thick, like velvet. The air cools your lungs. Clay scent grounds you. It feels like being inside the earth without being buried, safe, contained, steady. You sense how this corridor holds not only goods but also assurance, abundance stored, organized, protected. You stop between two jars and listen. Without wind, without voices, the quiet becomes layered, the lamp's soft hiss, your own breath, and beneath it all, the surf, so distant it could be imagined, but so regular it feels more real than any thought. Listening here is different than listening in the court. The storeroom quiet is tighter, more contained. The lamp's hiss becomes audible, a faint continuous sound of wick and oil and flame. Your breath becomes a slow rhythm in the darkness. The surf remains underneath, and in this enclosed corridor it feels like a secret, the world beyond still moving while the palace rests. The layers of quiet stack gently. Nothing interrupts. Nothing sharp enters. The mind begins to soften around the repetition. Breath. Lamp. Surf. Breath. Lamp. Surf. When you leave the storerooms, the corridor seems to guide you back toward warmth. You find a place where the wall plaster is smoother, where the floor is less dusty, and where a faint sweetness lingers, honey, perhaps, or a perfume made from herbs and flowers. The palace holds smells like it holds sound, storing them in stone, releasing them when the air shifts. The scent of sweetness is delicate. It does not smell like fresh honey, it smells like honey remembered by a room, faint, warm, slightly floral. Or perhaps it is perfume, herbs steeped in oil, a trace of rose or sage, something softened by time and absorbed into plaster. As you move, the air shifts and releases these scents in tiny pulses. A draft catches a corner and brings sweetness forward, then it fades again. The palace indeed holds smells the way it holds echoes, collecting them, keeping them, letting them surface when conditions are right. You pass a doorway and glimpse a small altar niche, simple, not dramatic, just a place where a lamp might be set, where a small offering might be placed and left to sit quietly through the hours. You do not add anything tonight. You simply notice the space and continue, letting the night remain uncomplicated. The niche is modest and calm. It does not glow with grandeur, it simply exists as a small hollow in the wall, a place that has received attention before. The idea of a lamp placed there feels natural, as if the wall itself expects it. The idea of an offering, grain, oil, flowers, feels equally natural, quiet gestures made without spectacle. Tonight, you do nothing. The simplicity is a relief. Not adding anything becomes its own kind of respect. You notice, then move on, allowing the night to remain clean and uncomplicated. As the night deepens further, you return to the bench where you sat earlier. You set the lamp down again, and this time you sit for longer. The stone under you is cool but steady, and your body begins to match that steadiness without effort. Sitting longer changes the way time feels. The lamp's flame becomes a steady point, and the room's shadows settle around it. Your body's small adjustments, shifting a foot, easing a shoulder, become slower, fewer. The stone's coolness is consistent, and that consistency invites your muscles to relax. Your breathing slows. Your thoughts soften. The bench becomes not only a seat but a quiet anchor in the palace's flow. The sounds feel farther away now, even though they are the same. The surf continues, and the wind brushes the upper openings now and then, but your attention no longer reaches outward as sharply. The lamplight is still warm, still moving, but it becomes less like a scene and more like a simple presence, a small, patient flame. Distance becomes a mental quality rather than a physical one. The surf is unchanged, yet it feels farther because you are less inclined to follow it outward. The wind's hush is still present, but it becomes part of the background rather than a thing to notice. The lamp's flame continues to flicker subtly, but you stop interpreting its movement as activity. It becomes presence, a small warm point that exists without needing meaning. Its light becomes a soft field you inhabit rather than a beam you track. After a while, you shift your feet and feel the floor's coolness through your sandals. You rest your hands on your knees, and you notice how your fingers warm each other where they meet. The palace's air touches your skin, and the night's humidity makes the fabric at your shoulder feel slightly heavier, as if the cloth is settling into place for the long hours ahead. The coolness through your sandals is gentle, a reminder that stone holds night patiently. Your fingers warming each other feels intimate, simple, human. Hands are small heaters, they share warmth without effort. The humidity is subtle, but you can feel it in fabric, linen or wool taking on a little extra weight, clinging slightly more to skin. The sensation is not uncomfortable. It feels like settling, like the night is placing a soft hand on your shoulder and encouraging stillness. You lift the lamp and walk again, but now the walking is almost an afterthought, a gentle loop that the palace seems to welcome. Corridor, corner, column. Threshold, step, light well. Court, colonnade, sky. The route changes, but the feeling stays the same, unhurried, continuous. Your steps are softer now, less purposeful. Walking becomes something you do the way you breathe, naturally, without needing a reason. The palace's repeating elements become a calm sequence, corners that turn without surprise, columns that mark space like quiet punctuation, thresholds that lift and lower your stride gently. Light wells offer cool breaths. Courts offer open sky. Corridors offer contained warmth. The loop feels like a lullaby made of architecture. In the court, the stars are still bright, and the sky feels endless. You take a slow breath, and the air tastes faintly of salt and stone. The sea's rhythm beyond the walls continues without needing anyone to mark it. The court's openness feels even more peaceful now because your body has slowed. Stars appear unchanged, and that unchanging quality is soothing. The air tastes clean, salt carried inland, stone cooled by night. Your breath meets that air gently, filling and emptying without hurry. The sea keeps time beyond walls, beyond sight. It does not require acknowledgement. It simply continues. You walk back inside and choose a narrower corridor, where the walls are close enough that you could touch them with both hands. You don't, but you like knowing the stone is there. The lamp's light slides along the plaster, and the shadows deepen behind you, gathering gently as you move forward. The narrow corridor creates a sense of protection. Walls near your shoulders feel like boundaries that keep the world simple. Knowing the stone is there is comforting, solid, reliable, cool. The lamp's light glides along plaster and reveals small textures, faint bumps, slight unevenness, tiny lines left by tools. Behind you, darkness gathers softly, not chasing, simply returning as light moves on. The corridor becomes a gentle tunnel of warm light ahead and cool shadow behind. At some point, hard to say when, the palace feels quieter than before, not because it was noisy, but because the last small movements of evening have ended. The doors are settled. The lamps elsewhere are mostly out. The workers and attendants are asleep in their places. The scribes' tablets are still on their shelves. The jars are still in their rows. The night is doing what it does, without announcements. The quiet becomes complete. Not absolute silence, surf and wind remain, but the kind of quiet that suggests a building fully at rest. Doors no longer shift. Footsteps no longer echo. Even distant lamp glows are rare. The palace feels like a sleeping creature, steady, large, breathing in slow ways through drafts and temperature shifts. The administrative objects, tablets, jars, remain exactly where they belong. Nothing is being changed. Nothing needs to be. You return to the softer rooms once more, where the marine paint rests on plaster like a memory of waves. You set your lamp down, and the dolphins, if they are dolphins, become gentle shapes again, not demanding attention, only offering it if you happen to look. The room receives you with softness. The marine paint becomes a quiet atmosphere rather than an image. When you set the lamp down, the light steadies, and the dolphins settle into gentle curves. They do not insist. They simply remain, like the sea remains. You sit, and this time you do not plan to stand again soon. The lamp's flame is smaller now, having burned for a long time. The oil is lower. The light pool on the floor is tighter, warmer, and the edges of the room begin to dissolve into shadow. Sitting feels final in the calmest way, final not as an ending, but as a decision to rest. The flame's smaller size is noticeable, it is still steady, still alive, but more contained. The oil's lower level means the lamp's light is more intimate, less far-reaching. The room's edges soften into darkness. Corners become vague. The ceiling disappears. What remains is the warm pool of light, the nearby wall, the faint suggestion of painted curves, and your own body settling into stillness. The surf remains, steady and low, and it becomes the simplest thing in your world. Your breathing meets it, not in perfect time, but in a similar unforced rhythm. The palace feels large, but it is no longer something you need to navigate, it is simply around you, a shelter made of stone and centuries. The surf becomes a steady bass note. Your breath becomes the nearer note. Together they create a gentle harmony of repetition. The palace surrounds you without demanding exploration. Its largeness becomes safety rather than complexity. You feel how stone can be comforting. How walls can hold quiet. How centuries can exist without weight pressing down. The palace is simply there, and that is enough. The lamp flickers softly, then steadies. The room holds its shapes without shifting. The plaster walls keep their colors even as they darken, and the painted curves become quieter, more suggestion than image. The night air moves faintly through a gap somewhere, and you feel it touch your forehead, then move on. The flicker is brief, like a blink. The steadying that follows feels reassuring, as if the lamp is committed to calm. The room remains stable. Nothing changes except the gradual deepening of shadow. The night air's faint movement is like a touch from something impersonal and kind. It brushes your skin and then is gone, leaving no chill, only a reminder that the palace is not sealed, it breathes. Your body grows heavier in a natural way, as if gravity has remembered you. The stone beneath you remains firm, and that firmness becomes comforting, like a steady hand that does not squeeze. The lamp's warmth reaches your fingers when you rest them near the clay, and then you let your hands fall back into stillness. Heaviness arrives gradually. Muscles stop holding themselves unnecessarily. The spine settles. The jaw softens. The stone's firmness is unwavering, and that unwavering quality becomes a kindness. It holds you without changing. The lamp's warmth near your fingers is a small luxury. You feel heat radiate gently from clay, then you let your hands rest again, allowing stillness to be complete. Outside, the sea keeps its gentle waves against the shore, unseen, unbothered, faithful to its own pattern. Inside, the palace keeps its quiet, faithful to its own structure. Nothing asks to be finished, and nothing asks to be held. The sea continues without witnessing. The palace continues without needing occupants awake. Both are faithful to pattern, waves arriving, waves leaving, corridors holding shadow, walls holding stillness. The absence of demands is the greatest comfort. You do not need to finish anything. You do not need to hold on to any thought. You can let the night be night. The lamp light contracts further as the oil runs low, and the room becomes more shadow than light. The last bright places are the rim of the lamp, the closest patch of floor, the faint sheen of plaster where the flame happens to catch. Everything else is soft and dim, as if the palace itself is settling deeper into night. The contraction is gradual. Light becomes a smaller circle. Brightness concentrates into tiny highlights, a rim, a corner of floor, a small sheen on plaster that looks almost like water in the faint glow. The rest dissolves into softness. Darkness here is not empty, it is gentle. It blurs edges and simplifies the world. The palace seems to settle with you, as if the building too is allowing itself to sink into deeper rest. You listen to the surf until it feels less like a sound and more like a constant, a slow background that was there before you arrived and will remain after you leave. The flame gives a final small flutter, then steadies again, smaller than before, patient in its last portion of oil. The surf becomes a condition of the world, like gravity, like night air. The flame's small flutter is a tiny acknowledgement of time passing. Then it steadies again, committed to calm, patient even as it diminishes. The room simplifies. The painted shapes fade into gentle darkness. The air cools by degrees. The palace's sounds become fewer, and the ones that remain, surf, wind, the tiny life of the lamp, feel like they belong to the night itself. Simplification is soothing. Shapes become less defined. The air cools imperceptibly, a slow drift rather than a change. Sounds thin out until only the essential layers remain: surf, wind, flame. These do not feel like events. They feel like the night's own breathing. And as the hours continue in their quiet order, the palace stays where it is, the sea stays where it is, and the small flame keeps its soft glow for as long as it can, without hurrying toward any ending. The night continues without needing a conclusion. The palace remains steady, holding its corridors and courts. The sea remains steady, holding its waves. The flame remains steady, holding its last warmth. Everything persists in a quiet order that asks nothing of you except to rest. Which scene do you want expanded even further next, the central court under the stars, or the storeroom corridor with the pit hoi?